In today's video, I want to speak about altered states of consciousness. I want to go into what are the common ideas on mainstream of what an altered state of consciousness is. These altered states of consciousness, what I've been speaking about all along in this channel, having to do with near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, entheogen-based experiences, and some others that I've been speaking about or that I'm going to be starting to speak about. These are a core foundation to understand the research on consciousness. Often when I'm discussing or presenting my work on social media, forums, and so on and so forth, I get into these discussions of what's going on, and you get a lot of people saying like, "Oh, this is nonsense. What are you talking about?" So on and so forth. When they put their arguments forward, and I put my arguments forward, when people ask, I tell them about these altered states of consciousness. I often use these arguments because this is the core, the bulk of the research that is going on today about consciousness. And they reply, what is an altered state of consciousness? And in my opinion, if you're going to be discussing these things, these higher philosophical concepts or religion or the nature of reality, you have to be acquainted with all this research on entheogens, on near-death experiences, on out-of-body experiences, and so on and so forth. But I realized going online, trying to go into the research, the way that I came about into this research, for me, all these themes and all these topics are very common. I've done this research for a long time, so I'm very familiar with it. But going a little bit into the mainstream, into what information we have out there related to altered states of consciousness, I can start to realize that we don't really have a lot of information about this phenomenon. Basically, we don't really know what consciousness is, much less we're gonna know what an altered state of consciousness is. I spoke about this on a recent video related to this consciousness or renaissance that is going on. So in this video, I want to go into some of these common ideas of what altered states of consciousness is, where I actually found some interesting ideas where the research is starting to lead into where we should be going to. And I'm gonna speak a little bit about why we need a new definition on altered states of consciousness based on the newer reports like near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and how the internet has allowed us to look into the bulk of the reports and go into more in-depth experiences like meeting with entities, alien-like figures, beings of light, these downloads of information about the creation of the universe, all these things that are more important than the current ideas, the current concept, the current definition of altered states of consciousness. Before I move forward, I would like to remind you that if you want to join the growing discussion on consciousness and would like to be notified on the latest scientific discoveries and theories surrounding this topic and how they connect to ancient mythologies and philosophies, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, as I'll try to upload at least one video per week as I continue with the outline. Just doing a brief search on Google, I found a couple of articles, a couple of websites where they point towards some information about altered states of consciousness. I didn't find a whole lot, as I said. I found a few academic research documents, but overall, on the mainstream, there isn't a lot of information. But I found a couple where this is by no means all the information we have on this, but this is the cultural idea that we have towards altered states of consciousness. This is more or less what the mainstream, the bulk of the population knows about these altered states of consciousness. So I found this article. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm not going to go in depth into any of this. I'm just going to speed read them and sort of get the idea of what they're all about. So I found this one on Psychology Today where they speak a little bit about altered states of consciousness. As matter things to do is to keep your intellect at rest. This is from Psychology Today. So I guess this is sort of like a popular psychology quote-unquote website. So when you hear the words altered state of consciousness, you may think of bell-bottoms, hippies, and LSD. Some altered states have nothing to do with drugs and more important than we may think. So the article goes on to speak about these ideas of hypnosis, meditation, hallucination, trance, dream stage, and so on and so forth. This is very common to some of the things that I talk about in this channel. So the article speaks about this hypnosis, meditation, hallucination, trance, dream stage, and then it goes on to tell the story of Adele, who was some client or something. She's a 45-year-old mother of two who suffer from depression related to aging, and she goes on to tell about her story, and we live our lives and meet our challenges with the intellect and the opportunities that altered states offer. So then she introduces altered states consciousness, right? And she goes on speaking about this therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It says some psychologists' most effective models of depression treatment, like MBCT, are based on the notion that the intellect can't always solve our problems, can actually make matters worse. So it goes on to say at the end of the day that she gave up on regular therapy, and now she went on a retreat, and when at home she took long walks in the woods. At the end of one such walk, looking at the river, something mysteriously coalesced. She knew she could focus again on what she liked about life, and what she could do with the rest of hers. From that point on, she began to feel better and eventually made a full recovery. So this is not an altered state of consciousness. This is just perhaps just freeing your mind and a little bit of meditation. It helps and so on and so forth. But this is not an altered state of consciousness. This is a rational decision of someone who decides to look at their life and figure out some things and what they could do with their life, and now focus on that. This is a rational decision. This is not an altered state of consciousness, and it's this was written in 2015. It makes sense because the some of the recent studies on altered states of consciousness are really recent. I'm talking about the last 3, 5, 2 years. So let's go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is, of course, not the best source of information, but it tells us a little bit of where, as in general, what is the mainstream idea of a topic, what is the more common information that we can find regarding a topic. So it goes on to talk about the altered state of mind or mind alteration. It goes on to different definitions. There is no general definition of an altered state of consciousness, as any definitions attempt, but firstly have to rely on a definition of a normal state of consciousness. And this is the realization that I had, that I spoke in the intro of this video. We don't really know what consciousness is. I spoke about this on a recent video. We're barely beginning to understand what consciousness is, and starting to realize that this is the topic at hand. We think we know, but we don't. So attempts to define the term can, however, be found in philosophy, psychology, neuroscience. There's no final consensus what the most accurate definition for what purpose is. So this is a great realization. This is exactly what we have right now. We don't know what consciousness is, much less are we really gonna understand what an altered consciousness, a state of consciousness is. So one of these definitions is Arnold M. Ludwig. An altered state is any mental state induced by various physiological, psychological, pharmacological maneuvers or agents which can be recognized objectively by the individual himself or by any objective observer of the individual, representing a sufficient deviation in subjective experience of psychological functioning from certain general norms for the individual during alert waking consciousness. Tells me absolutely nothing of what an altered state of consciousness is. It's just different, induced by different means. It's a different state of waking consciousness. This is all that is being said here. It goes into the history, utilization of ASCs, history of the science of theoretical modeling, and so on and so forth. This and the history, it goes into the ancient societies, it goes into the shamanism, and so on and so forth. Some sort of early religious use of all the states of consciousness are the rites of Dionysius. I recently wrote a little bit about this. I've been looking into these Eleusinian mysteries. If you go on and especially go into the Terence McKenna speaking about Eleusinian mysteries, it's a very good idea of what these were all about. And more than Terence McKenna, there's sort of a current researcher on this. His name is Brian Murarescu. Is speaking about these Eleusinian mysteries and the ancient use of entheogens in the ancient mythologies, and even Christianity itself is very interesting. I'm probably going to be speaking about this in the future. Followers of various shamanic traditions and the altered state of consciousness in order to serve their community. Terence McKenna has suggested that the use of psychedelic mushrooms in prehistoric times has led to the evolution of human language and symbol use. This is something that Brian Moresco is also speaking of. Some theories report that my altering substance such as soma might have pushed the information of some of the world's main religions. Exactly. All of the religions, most of the religions come from this quote-unquote altered state of consciousness. So I wrote this book named The Ghost of Jesus. I get into a lot of theological debate with people who are religious, people who are not religious, and they start going on about and putting out their arguments. And when I talk to them about altered state of consciousness, they come back to me saying, what is an altered state of consciousness? Well, now we're having this series that most of the main religions are coming from this quote-unquote altered state of consciousness. What exactly, how is this happening? Well, if you go into the scriptures, what exactly are all of these quote-unquote visions? They speak about that suddenly they came and the Holy Spirit came and they had a vision of an entity or the burning bush, and it spoke to him, things of this nature. Even in the transfiguration of Jesus, which is something that I speak in a whole chapter at the end of this first iteration of the outline. During the transfiguration, there's something in all of the canonical gospels where they say the disciples who witnessed this, quote unquote, were heavy with sleep. This is the translation. When you go into it, they use the Greek word for it, which is I can't remember at the moment right now, but is in Greek mythology is the brother of death, which is sleep, which is this state of the in-between. So when you go into all of these altered states of consciousness, of course they speak about sleep. It goes here. It's probably somewhere around here. Okay, so we go into the classification, spontaneous daydream and near-death experience. This is what I'm going to be speaking about in a bit. Physical and physiological fasting and sex. Fasting, I've gone into fasting before. It seems to cause an altered state of consciousness, most likely because if you put your body through extreme fasting, you are going to be on the brink of death, which the Buddha and Jesus did this extreme fasting, and they had very similar experience. I've talked about this. I have a video about this. I'm probably going to link it somewhere along the screen right now. Psychological music, meditation, hypnosis. Meditation, you go into the samadhi, the Eastern tradition of deep meditation, and that's when things start to happen. Pathological, epilepsy, brain damage, pharmacological, psychoactive substances, entheogens. This is some of the modern research as well. So far, more than 10 minutes into the video, I'm going to the whole Wikipedia page and some of the common articles that we can find about it, and we really don't get an explanation of what an altered state of consciousness is. We don't get all the reports about the entities and all these things in the common media. For the first one was just a lady walking on the woods and realizing something. For Wikipedia, it's just all the theoretical information, but we don't get the actual report. We don't get people are seeing beings of light or alien entities telling them about exactly what's going on in the universe. But in any case, I went into some of the other more academic reports or research out there. I found the one from Winkelmann, which is one of the main prominent researchers on altered states of consciousness, and he goes into a very interesting paper speaking about all the physiological themes and how to induce them, and it's very technical, very theoretical, but it doesn't really go into what actually is an altered state of consciousness. And for the sake of making this video shorter, I'm gonna link it somewhere below in this video, but I just went into another paper which I found a little bit more interesting, related to the connection between altered states of consciousness and some of the early cultures with shamanism and the Native Americans and so on and so forth. So, altered state of consciousness, Carol R. Emba, Christina Carlos. This is an abstract. Nearly all societies are known to engage in practices that lead to altered states of consciousness. However, the methods, functions, and cultural context vary widely between societies. One major variation is whether societies believe in possession by spirits or in one's soul fleeing or going on a journey. We summarize what we know of this variation from cross-cultural research. So this goes a little bit more into explaining what exactly is an altered state of consciousness. It has to do with shamanism, what to do with the possession of spirits, with one's soul's fleeing or going on a journey into the deep periods of sleep, or even out-of-body experiences, which are very, very important in this research. But it mainly goes on to say that the ancient cultures and how they the shamanism and so on and so forth, some of ASC and archaeological record, it goes on to say about, to speak about entheogens. It's hallucinogens. Religious specialists employed a Maori kava, macabre shelsum, and it goes on to go into entheogens and how they achieve this altered states of consciousness. But it's not only entheogens. This is what we know today. There are many ways to achieve these states. Goes on to speak about trance a little bit, some of the physical changes that can be seen, feelings of rejuvenation, changes in the body image, what they're calling institutionalized trances, as a type of trance in which the person's soul is believed to leave the body because it is abducted or goes on a journey. Obsession and trance, which is changing a person's behavior and utterances during the trance, are explained by being possessed or taken by a spirit of some kind. So this is the idea of speaking in tongues, so channeling perhaps. So all these things have been researched, but they don't really go in depth into what really is. And there's often the idea of the shaman, of this ancient, sometimes called primitive, sometimes called basic culture somewhere. And this is not the case. This is not exactly what altered states of consciousness is. Going here a little bit into the idea of trances, trance and other altered states of consciousness are strongly associated with healing practices of shamans. As a set of magical religious healers, among shamans, trances are usually induced by mechanisms such as singing, chanting, drumming, or dancing, after which the shaman in training or practice collapses and becomes unconscious and has intense visual experiences. These experiences presumably induce a state of relaxation that replaces fast brain activity in the front areas of the brain with slow wave activity representing more emotional information. All this is from Winkelmann. This is one of the researchers. So it speaks about the connection between trance and healing. I've spoken about these rituals before, how it is the idea of the ritual is that both the shaman and the subject of the healing have to be very involved into the healing. Now in this first iteration of the outline, I speak about Jesus and his healings and how he always asks the subject in the scriptures if they think that he can heal them, if they think that he can do this. And he always says, it is by your faith that this is done to you, or something of that nature. So some of the research suggests, I've spoken about this before, I'm going to link it somewhere on the screen, of the real research on quote-unquote energy healing, where it speaks about this is not energy, this is not about going into the trance state, this is about intention. It is likely that using this using these tools as it is drumming and dancing, or mantras or rituals, or just grabbing beats and just rocking back and forward. Any sort of use of candles and sigils and whatnot are just tools to infuse that intention. This is what is most likely happening, but this ties into a higher concept of thinking that everything is a holographic universe. We live in a holographic universe, and if you shift the idea and some other people you tag along with that idea, you create a collective, and someone who is strong into tapping into this other world perhaps can actually become a magical religious healer, as seems to have been the case for Jesus, and as we can see some of these other shamans that are mentioned in these studies in outer state of consciousness. Goes on to mention something interesting about quote-unquote spirits. The vision quest. In native North American societies, individuals reaching puberty sought out a guardian spirit. Guardian spirits were neither ghosts nor culture heroes. They were usually spirits of plants or animals or celestial bodies. Such spirits were sought out by individuals in the hope that they might grant health, strength, and the power to cure others, or success in hunting, war, or love. So this idea of the spirit in North American societies, native North American societies, was that it was simply some sort of a tool, some sort of a connection with a quote-unquote celestial body perhaps, which was gonna help them become healers to cure others, success in whatever they may ask from this spirit. This is something so interesting. This such spirit was able to help them to perhaps cure others or become healers, to be successful in hunting, war, love, anything they may ask from the quote-unquote spirit. This is exactly what Jesus was speaking about. He said, you may ask, he called him the Father, he called it the Spirit, the Holy Spirit and the Father. They were sort of different things, but at the same time they were sort of the same thing. They said, you ask anything from the Father and he will reply. He would go within, go into the quote-unquote kingdom of heaven. He's speaking about becoming into an altered state of consciousness where then you would ask for anything with shameless audacity. I've spoken about this before, about this whole concept of faith, which is to picture something in the future and actualize it today. The same thing was done by ancient native North American societies, but instead of the whole dogma that Christianity carried, they simply asked for a created or perhaps aimed towards a guardian spirit. It's not the Holy Spirit, it's a guardian spirit. But this, in essence, it's the same. We're speaking about this perhaps holographic concept where there's a larger reality at hand. So if it works, or it worked for Jesus perhaps to cure others based on asking the Father or asking the Spirit, it worked also for Native North Americans, just asking this guardian spirit. So we're not speaking about a specific God. We're not speaking about a specific tradition. We're speaking about a larger theme that through these altered states of consciousness is able to be accessed and used for anything you may ask. As Jesus said, you may pray for anything. You may ask anything from the Father, and by your shameless audacity, it will be given for you. Hunting, war, love, cure others, it doesn't really matter. It says here, what predicts the guardian spirit complex or vision quad certifies no instances outside of North America. I just explained. This is exactly what Jesus is speaking about. If you change this guardian spirit with Holy Spirit and gifts, there's even the word gifts here of power to a particular person. Able to give gifts, the gifts of the Spirit, as spoken by, as talked about by Paul the Apostle, the quote-unquote gifts of the Spirit, is this, they're speaking about the same thing. So as we can see, just going through some of the common ideas that we have on altered states of consciousness, going to some of the articles, through the Wikipedia page, through some of the more in-depth research papers, we can see sort of the pattern that it's often thought of as something that happened in ancient societies, in primitive cultures, where people believe in spirits and believe in all these rituals and whatnot. And today we just look at those societies and at that phenomenon as something completely outside of our current scientific world. So, for example, in the one in Wikipedia, it only tells about some of the physiological and the psychological effects and ideas, but it doesn't really go in depth into the ideas, into what actually happens on an altered state of consciousness. It talks about hallucinogenics and the hallucinant mysteries and whatnot, but doesn't really talk about what actually is an altered state of consciousness. In the latter research paper that I read, it goes a little bit further in, and we can see, as I talked about, it has some similarity to some of the ideas that I've been talking about in this channel. The whole idea of the spirit and the dreams. At the latter part of the research paper, it talked about dreams and how we don't have enough research done on dreams. I had spoken. I had gone further into it. We do have this research on dreams. Actually, Carl Jung did a whole compendium about it, and that's where he came up with his idea of the collective consciousness and some of these archetypes that happen in all cultures. So I think the work of Carl Jung it's not really today as relevant, taken as relevant as it really is, and as the research on consciousness evolves, it's going to become even more relevant. So we can see the pattern. They think it's about these ancient cultures, shamanism, hallucinations, and whatnot. In the case of the first article, people think it's simply like coming into a realization, and that's, in their eyes, that's quote-unquote an altered state of consciousness. No wonder when I speak about these things, some people say, well, what does that have to do with anything? So the reason why I think we should have a new definition of what an altered state of consciousness is, and we are beginning to have it with the whole, as they call it, reality revolution, this renaissance in entheogen research, which just happened at the beginning of this year, at the end of the last year, the actual official government-backed research on entheogens. So what all of these articles and common knowledge we have on altered states of consciousness fail to mention is the whole compendium that has been done on near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, the research on hallucinogenics, on entheogens, and some of the other more, I would say, less popular situations where altered states of consciousness happen, like hypnosis, like deep states of meditation, or even channelers. Some of these latter ones, I wouldn't take them seriously before, but as I've gone with the research, I realized that all of them are speaking about the same things. All of these common knowledge and altered states of consciousness is missing what the actual reports are about. They are missing meeting with entities, meeting with alien-like figures, which suddenly, or of these subjects being able to download a lot of information about the creation of the universe, about the relation with us and these other entities, or everyone else in this world, and perhaps in other worlds or other dimensions. All of these channelers, all of these near-death experiences have the same thing happening in them, with different settings, with different sort of entities. Some people see religious figures, some people just see beings of light, some people just hear a voice or something of that nature, but it all points towards the same. towards this one revelation, which, as we see, our current society looks at them as these ancient crazy people who were doing rituals, or as I've talked about before, these quote unquote mystical psychosis, these terms coined by psychologists, which where people would think would have these quote unquote hallucinations about them being connected with everything that is, with something higher than them. And our current society looks at all of this as if it was some sort of illness. And that is very, very wrong, because today we are having these stacking reports from near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, all that I previously mentioned, and these are not being taken into account yet. Provided all of these are very recent, all of this research on entheogens, all of this is coming out very recent. When one of the papers that I'm going to link below from Winkelmann, talking about altered states of consciousness, when he wrote that, the internet was not really what it is today. Internet, as we know it today, through social media, through smartphones, is a thing of the last 10 to 15 years. And what that has allowed us to do is to share all this information. So you can go into forums and find just tons of literature of what an actual report of people under the influence of entheogens is. You can find all these near-death experiences. You can find all this literature on out-of-body experiences, on channelers. What I found is that they are all speaking about the same thing, about the same themes, about the same underlying reality. What I'm doing with this outline is overlapping these newer research, these newer reports, with newer scientific theories like the unified field of consciousness, like the OR from Penrose and Hameroff, with all these ancient societies and these ancient philosophies like Christianity, with the whole thing of the spirit, as I spoke about in this video, with the ancient Native Americans and their perspective on this quote unquote spirit. When you overlap all of these, you get a very clear picture of what's going on. So we need to start setting the foundation in order for us to understand who we are, why are we here for, and where we're going. And that is the purpose of this rational divine outline. If you're on the path of finding the truth about reality and our purpose as humans on Earth, the information that I have to share concerns you. After a lifetime of research in philosophies ranging from Buddhism to the occult, I've encountered themes and patterns along some baffling information that is beginning to be seriously studied by science. Our rational divine outline, The Ghost of Jesus, is the first iteration of this project, where I analyze the message of Jesus without dogmatism, fanaticism, or religious bias. You can find my work available on Amazon on the link below. If you find this work valuable, consider subscribing, sharing, and following me on social media, as it will help others in the same path to find this information. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.